Imagine this. You slowly open your eyes, and the morning sunlight filters through a simple stone window. The smell of freshly baked bread and the earthy scent of olive oil fill the air. But wait, this isn't your bed. This isn't your home. You're no longer in the world you know today. Welcome to ancient Greece, around the 5th century BCE. Now, let me ask you, how did you end up here? What would you do if you suddenly found yourself in the heart of one of the greatest civilizations in history? Well, there's one thing you'll quickly discover. This world is nothing like the comfort and safety we take for granted in the modern age. In ancient Greece, the gods are not myths. They are real, and their power shapes every aspect of life. You stand up, stretch, and feel the cool stone floor beneath your feet. But as you glance around, your first task isn't to check your phone or brew a cup of coffee. No, here in this world, your first duty is to acknowledge the gods. You can't ignore them. They are always watching, and their moods, whether wrathful or benevolent, can change in an instant, affecting your fate. Take a deep breath for a moment. Let's pause and picture ourselves here. Imagine the gods watching over every move you make, every word you say. How would you feel? Nervous? Anxious? Or would you feel a deep sense of awe, knowing that the very fate of your day depends on their will? So, what's it like to survive even a single day in a world where the divine is ever present, ready to intervene at any moment? Well, let's step into this world together and explore. Because, my friend, the truth is, this isn't a world built for modern humans. The rituals, the sacrifices, the constant need to appease the gods, these aren't just stories. They are the very fabric of life. They determine who survives and who doesn't. I can already hear you wondering, how could it be so dangerous? How could this simple act of living cause one to fall out of favor with the gods? Stick with me, and you'll see. From the moment you wake, your survival depends on rituals, offerings, and proper conduct. A single misstep could mean the difference between divine favor and doom. Before we dive deeper into this ancient world, make sure you're subscribed to this channel so you can join us on this historical adventure. Hit the like button if you're ready to explore what life in ancient Greece was truly like, and share this video with friends who'd love to learn about the wild and dangerous world where gods and mortals lived side by side. Thank you for joining me on this journey through time. Let's get started. Welcome to ancient Greece. As you step outside your humble stone house, the cool morning air brushes against your skin. The sun is already rising, casting a golden glow over the Mediterranean landscape. But before you do anything, there's something you need to do. You might feel the urge to check your phone or grab a warm cup of coffee to start the day. But here in ancient Greece, those comforts simply don't exist. No, your day begins with something far more important, something that could determine the course of your entire life. Paying homage to the gods. As the first rays of sunlight stream through the simple stone windows of your modest home, you slowly open your eyes, aware of the world around you. But before you can even stretch or plan the day, something far more important demands your attention. You're not in the modern world where you reach for your phone or brew a cup of coffee to begin the day. Instead, you wake up in ancient Greece, a world where the gods are never far from your thoughts and actions. The first thing you must do is honor the gods, your household gods. In the corner of your room, near the hearth, stands a small but sacred altar, carefully prepared by you and your family. At this altar are statues or small carvings of Zeus, the king of all gods, Hestia, goddess of the hearth and family, and Hermes, the messenger of the gods and protector of travelers. These gods are not just symbols of divine power, they are your guardians, your protectors, and your only hope for survival in a world where fate can be sealed by a single misstep. Before anything else, before you even think about getting out of bed or beginning your daily tasks, you must make an offering. You take a small vessel, perhaps a cup of water or wine, and carefully pour a little of it onto the altar as a libation, a small token of respect. This is not merely a tradition or ritual. It is a life or death matter. The gods demand acknowledgement, and if you fail to give them the proper respect, you risk their divine wrath. A quick prayer follows, asking for protection, blessings, and good fortune in the day ahead. In ancient Greece, religion is the lens through which every moment of life is viewed. It's not just a matter of belief, it's a matter of survival. You are constantly aware that even the smallest mistake could lead to catastrophic consequences. One moment of negligence or disrespect could bring down the anger of the gods, and the repercussions could be swift and devastating. Failure to show proper reverence is not something to be taken lightly. A single moment of carelessness can lead to divine punishment, an act so powerful it can change the course of your life forever. In ancient Greece, the gods were known to be capricious, and their wrath could strike without warning. Take, for example, the tragic story of Niobe, a woman who was once proud and arrogant. Niobe, the queen of Thebes, had 14 children and boasted that she was superior to Leto, the mother of the gods Apollo and Artemis, who had only 2 children. Her prideful words angered the gods, and as punishment, Apollo and Artemis killed all 14 of her children. In her grief and arrogance, Niobe still refused to humble herself before the gods, and as a final act of divine retribution, the gods turned her to stone. She was condemned to weep for eternity, her stone form forever reflecting the price of hubris. To the ancient Greeks, this was not just a story, it was a real possibility. A lack of respect toward the gods could lead to irreversible consequences. The gods didn't simply punish you for major crimes, they punished you for minor offenses, such as forgetting a prayer or failing to acknowledge them when passing their shrine. In this world, a single careless mistake could end everything, and the gods had the power to destroy lives in an instant. The lesson of Niobe serves as a chilling reminder of the consequences of hubris and disrespect. In ancient Greece, the gods were always watching, and their judgment could come at any time. Without modern conveniences or distractions, your world revolves entirely around the gods. There's no room for forgetting the divine, no room for negligence in rituals. Every part of your day, from the food you eat to the work you do, is conducted with the understanding that the gods are watching, and their favor or disfavor can shape your fate. As you step outside into the bustling streets of ancient Greece, the world around you is alive with activity. The narrow, cobbled streets are already crowded with people, each busy with their daily tasks. Men in simple tunics hurry to the Agora, the marketplace and heart of the city, to engage in political discourse or buy goods for the day. Women, carrying water jugs on their heads, make their way to the public fountains. Children, with their simple wooden toys, run and laugh, playing games with other neighborhood children. But despite the movement and noise of the city, something stands out: the omnipresence of the gods. Everywhere you look, there are signs of divine influence. As you step into the streets of ancient Athens, it becomes clear that the gods are not a distant concept. They are very much a part of your day-to-day life. Everywhere you turn, divine presence is embedded in the very fabric of the city. The streets are lined with altars, shrines, and stone pillars dedicated to various gods. You can see the Hermes standing tall at every major intersection, tall stone pillars topped with the head of Hermes with his symbolic genitals to represent fertility and the safeguarding of the city's boundaries. These figures, often placed at crossroads, mark the gates to sacred spaces, protecting travelers and offering divine blessings to those who pass by. As you walk, you notice smaller altars at the foot of public buildings or outside homes, where ordinary citizens stop to offer prayers or libations, small offerings of wine or water. These altars, though simple, are integral parts of the urban landscape. They remind you that no space is secular. Everything belongs to the gods. Even as you pass by, you instinctively bow your head or whisper a prayer. Failure to acknowledge the gods here is not just a personal oversight. It is an act of defiance that could invite divine retribution. The gods are always watching, and their power is present in every aspect of your life. Every corner of the city is a reminder of the gods' eternal supervision. You see sacred symbols everywhere, representations of Zeus, Hera, Apollo, and other deities are embedded into the city's architecture and urban planning. These visual cues reinforce the notion that life in ancient Greece is always, fundamentally, a life of devotion, one where humans and gods exist in constant interaction, shaping each other's fates. As you continue through the streets, you see a crowd gathering at the entrance of a large temple dedicated to Apollo or Athena. Ancient Greece is a city of religious observance. As you continue walking through the streets, you can't miss the large crowds gathered at the entrance of a temple or at the heart of a religious procession. Today is one of the many sacred festival days of the year, a day set aside to honor a specific god or goddess, with the entire community participating in the rituals. Festivals like the Panathenaic Games, in honor of Athena, or the Delian festivals for Apollo, are celebrated with grand processions, feasts, and ritual sacrifices. These festivals are not only times of devotion, but also of communal celebration, where the entire city comes together to mark the favor of the gods. As part of these festivals, the sacrifice of animals, often a bull or sheep, is one of the most significant rituals. Priests, dressed in ceremonial robes, lead the animal to the altar, where it is carefully slaughtered. The blood is caught in a sacred vessel and offered to the gods, while the meat is often shared in a communal feast, emphasizing the bond between the gods and their worshippers. It is believed that the gods partake in the offering through the smoke that rises to the heavens, carrying the prayers of the people. These festivals also serve as a space for the community to reaffirm its civic identity. Participating in the sacred events is a way to demonstrate your loyalty not just to the gods, but to your fellow citizens. The festivals often include athletic competitions, musical contests, and artistic performances, where the best of Greek talent is celebrated. Philosophical debates also occur, reinforcing the intellectual and religious fabric of Greek society. In ancient Greece, there is no separation between religion and daily life. They are inseparable. It's impossible to imagine a true Greek citizen who does not actively participate in the religious life of the city. Religious rituals are not something reserved for the temple alone. They define your role in society. Failure to attend these public festivals or to join in the sacrifices could be considered an affront to the gods and, by extension, an insult to the community. Missing a major festival is more than just skipping out on a civic event. It is seen as an act of disrespect, a rejection of the divine will that governs not just your personal life, but the prosperity of the entire city-state. Social cohesion in ancient Greece relies heavily on shared religious observance. This is where the entire community gathers, whether to worship at the temples, participate in religious festivals, or perform the rituals necessary to maintain divine favor. Everyone, regardless of their wealth or status, must acknowledge their place in the divine order. If someone refuses to participate, they are seen as someone who challenges the sacred balance that holds society together. In fact, participation in religious rituals is not just an act of devotion, it is a civic duty. Your involvement in these rituals affirms your place within the social order. If you are absent or disrespectful, it could lead to serious consequences, including being shunned by the community, or worse, facing divine retribution for ignoring the gods' influence on your life. The gods, in Greek belief, are not just observers, they demand respect, and failure to offer them this respect often results in disaster, as you'll see when exploring the myth of Niobe. In ancient Greece, there is no separation between religion, politics, and daily life. Everything is interwoven, and the influence of the gods is present in all matters, from politics and law to farming and military actions. Every major decision, from military campaigns to public policies, is made with the gods in mind. Sacrifices before battle, or consulting the gods for omens before making important decisions, are common practices. In times of crisis, like war or famine, the people look to the gods for guidance, and it is expected that the city's leaders will consult with the gods to ensure their decisions are in line with divine will. This constant interaction with the divine permeates every aspect of life. You might make offerings before meals, perform rituals to protect your home and family, or participate in public festivals to ensure the city stays under the gods' protection. Life in ancient Greece is not only about survival or thriving, it's about living in harmony with the gods and maintaining divine favor. You do not just live in a world of gods, you live with them, constantly reminded of their presence and influence. When you participate in a religious sacrifice in the city, you quickly realize that these rituals are not just about honoring the gods, they are deeply interwoven with community life, where everyone has a role to play. The animal sacrifice ceremony is carried out with meticulous care and reverence. Picture yourself standing with the crowd under the towering stone pillars, bathed in sunlight, as the images of the gods gaze down upon you. The ceremony begins with water being poured over the animal, usually a bull or a sheep, as a symbolic purification. This is done to cleanse the animal before it is offered to the gods. Imagine you are standing in the middle of a bustling ancient Greek city, surrounded by people who share the same reverence for the gods. The air is filled with anticipation as the sacrifice begins. The priest, dressed in ceremonial robes, steps forward, and the first act is the pouring of water over the animal, a symbol of purification before the sacred offering. This is not just a ritualistic gesture, it's a spiritual cleansing. As the water drips down the sides of the animal, it is prepared for its role in the ceremony. The sacrificial animal, often a bull or a sheep, stands calmly in front of the altar, unaware of the fate that awaits. Once the purification is complete, the priest takes a sacred knife and with precision slits the animal's throat. Blood pours out into a bowl, and part of the blood is splattered on the altar, while the rest is collected for further rituals. The body of the animal is carefully handled as it is dismembered. The bones, wrapped in fat, are thrown into the fire, offering the gods their portion, while the rest of the meat will be used for communal sharing. This ritual is about surrendering part of the sacrifice to the divine, while still keeping enough to nourish the people. The fire, blazing with the offerings, burns bright as the aroma of the animal fat rises toward the heavens. The gods receive their share, and the people know that this act of reverence will ensure their survival and prosperity. After the ceremonial sacrifice, the distribution of meat becomes an important social event, symbolizing the shared connection between the gods and the people. In a society where meat was a luxury and not readily available, the communal feast that followed the ritual marked a rare moment of abundance. For most Greeks, meat was a privilege, something only available on special occasions, such as festivals or sacrifices to the gods. Daily meals typically consisted of bread, fruits, vegetables, and modest portions of fish. Meat was too valuable to be consumed regularly. When the sacrifice is made, the divine portion, the bones wrapped in fat and burnt offerings, is given to the gods, and the remaining meat is distributed among the citizens. This practice ensures that the blessings from the gods are shared equally. The wealthy citizens might partake in the feast as a public display of their prosperity, but the poor also benefit, ensuring that all members of society have a share in the divine bounty. It is a time of solidarity, where the rich and the poor come together to partake in the same food, demonstrating that all are equal under the God's eyes. The distribution of meat is more than just about sustenance. It is a symbol of divine favor. For the common people, this feast is not only an opportunity to eat something they cannot afford regularly, but also a physical manifestation of their connection to the gods. It is an occasion to reaffirm that the gods have granted them favor, ensuring that the community will continue to thrive. Without this divine connection, the harvests may fail, the crops may wither, and life would return to its usual, harsher routine. The communal sharing of meat reinforces unity, both between the gods and the people, and among the people themselves. For the ancient Greeks, religion was not simply about spiritual belief. It was intrinsically tied to their survival and prosperity. The people believed that the gods' favor was directly linked to their daily lives. If the gods were pleased with their actions, their offerings, and their piety, the rewards would be plentiful. Bountiful harvests, good health, and success in war. But if the gods were angered, the consequences would be swift and severe disease, famine, defeat in battle, and natural disasters were seen as manifestations of divine punishment. The sacrifice performed on the altar was seen as a way of keeping the gods pleased, ensuring the continued fertility of the land and the well-being of the community. The act of sacrifice was thus essential to the maintenance of life. This is why it was not merely a ritualistic duty, but a vital task that affected everyone in the city. A failed sacrifice, or worse, an insincere sacrifice, would be a direct cause of disaster. If the gods were not properly honored, they could retaliate by withholding rain, causing the crops to fail, or sending plagues to decimate the population. A good harvest or victory in battle was therefore not merely the result of human effort. It was a divine blessing that could only be earned by the proper observance of rituals. This belief was deeply ingrained in the culture of ancient Greece, and it affected everything from personal actions to political decisions. When something went wrong, the first thought was not, "What went wrong?" but rather, "Which god have we angered?" This belief in divine retribution or favor shaped the very structure of society, reinforcing the need to maintain proper relationships with the gods through rituals and offerings. In a sense, the community's well-being was a reflection of its relationship with the divine, and maintaining that relationship required constant care and reverence. Every action, from the smallest daily activity to the largest civic event, was seen as potentially influencing the favor of the gods. A lack of respect for the gods, an improper offering, or an unauthorized change in ritual could bring divine wrath and trigger devastating consequences. Religion in ancient Greece was not simply a personal belief system. It was a public and communal responsibility that bound the citizens together. The gods were seen as active participants in the world, and their favor or disfavor could directly affect everyone in the city. This belief made religion a fundamental part of the civic structure, so much so that it was not distinguishable from law or political life. Religious observances were community rituals, a shared responsibility that everyone had to participate in, regardless of their social standing. To neglect or ignore religious duties was considered a threat to the community's well-being. Failure to perform a sacrifice, or worse, to disrespect the gods, was seen as socially unacceptable and could even have legal consequences. Religious festivals, sacrifices, and ceremonies were rituals of civic pride, To fail to participate was not just an individual mistake, but an affront to the social fabric of the city. Every citizen, from the highest to the lowest, was expected to uphold the shared responsibility of maintaining proper relationships with the gods. If a citizen was found guilty of impiety, they could be ostracized or even executed, as in the case of the philosopher Socrates, who was condemned to death for challenging the gods and corrupting the youth of Athens. This religious duty was considered just as important as any legal obligation. If you failed to follow the laws of the gods, it was tantamount to breaking the laws of the state. Just as there were laws governing the treatment of citizens and the conduct of war, there were religious laws governing how citizens were expected to live in harmony with the divine. These laws were enforced with the same strictness and severity as any civil law. The gods, after all, were the ultimate enforcers of law, and it was believed that they could punish the entire community for individual failures. In this society, religion and law were not separate spheres, but were completely interwoven. There was no secular space. Everything was religious to some extent, from the daily acts of devotion at household shrines to the grand civic festivals honoring the gods. The entire structure of society was built on the foundation of religious observance, where each individual's actions were scrutinized through the lens of divine law. Religion in ancient Greece was, therefore, a force that was not only spiritual but also legal, political, and social. It governed all aspects of life, ensuring that the gods were always acknowledged, always present, and always ready to reward or punish based on the behavior of their people. As we've seen, religion in ancient Greece was woven into the fabric of everyday life, with gods constantly watching over, punishing, and rewarding the people. There was no escape from the divine presence, and for the average Greek, maintaining favor with the gods was the key to survival. But what about those who dared to question the natural order, those who attempted to challenge the gods? This brings us to the tension between faith and reason, between devotion and philosophical inquiry. Let's now explore how the ancient Greeks struggled with the clash between these forces and the role of sin and divine punishment in their society. In a society so deeply rooted in religious practice, where gods were thought to control everything from the harvest to victory in battle, there were those who questioned the divine order. The most famous of these were the philosophers, whose rational inquiry and search for truth sometimes led them to places where the gods were no longer at the center. Two of the most well-known figures in this respect were Anaxagoras and Socrates. Anaxagoras, a pre-Socratic philosopher, famously denied the anthropomorphic nature of the gods, arguing instead that the sun was merely a hot stone rather than the fiery chariot of Helios, as the traditional myth suggested. His ideas, which placed the natural world and its workings ahead of divine interference, were deemed so radical that he was exiled from Athens and labeled impious. Socrates, perhaps the most well-known of the philosophers, took his questioning even further. He famously challenged the accepted religious norms of his time, suggesting that philosophical reasoning should be prioritized over tradition. His method of questioning everything, even the very nature of the gods themselves, was seen as dangerous by the authorities. Socrates didn't deny the existence of gods, but he reinterpreted their role in human affairs, urging others to seek truth through reason rather than blind faith. In both cases, these philosophers dared to question the divine authority, a grave offense in a society where religion was not only a matter of personal belief, but also a political and social obligation. They were eventually condemned as atheists or impious, demonstrating that even rational thought could not escape the reach of the gods' punishment. The fear of divine retribution was not just a personal matter in ancient Greece. It was central to the maintenance of order and control in society. The gods, with their tempers and their capricious nature, were a powerful tool used by the ruling class to enforce conformity and obedience. This was evident in how Poseidon, the god of the sea, and Athena, the goddess of wisdom, were often invoked not only for religious purposes but also to sway political actions and to instill fear in the people. Take the example of Poseidon. The sea, for the Greeks, was an unpredictable and violent force, just like the god himself. Sailors and traders relied on Poseidon's favor for their livelihoods, and any sign of displeasure from him, such as a storm at sea, was seen as divine punishment for something that had gone wrong in the city. In this sense, the gods were a tool of social control, making people believe that if they didn't adhere to the proper religious practices, they would invite disaster into their lives. Similarly, Athena, the patron goddess of Athens, represented wisdom, but her wrath was something to be feared. Her intervention could be the difference between victory and defeat in war. Leaders would often claim that their military victories were the result of divine favor, and defeats were attributed to divine displeasure. This allowed the gods to maintain their relevance in public life, even in times of political and military strife. But there was one sin that was considered the gravest of all in the eyes of the gods: hubris. Hubris was the act of excessive pride or arrogance, especially when it involved challenging the gods or placing oneself above them. In a society where the gods were not just powerful but all-encompassing, to defy them was a mortal's most dangerous mistake. The Greeks believed that anyone who committed hubris would inevitably attract Nemesis, the goddess of divine retribution. Hubris was seen as an imbalance in the natural order, an attempt by mortals to act as though they were equal to, or even more powerful than, the gods. The consequences were swift and unforgiving. The most famous example is that of Niobe, a queen who boasted that she had more children than Leto, the mother of the gods Apollo and Artemis. In response to her arrogance, Apollo and Artemis killed all of Niobe's children. In some versions of the myth, she was even transformed into stone, forever weeping for the loss of her family. This myth was just one example of how the gods used Nemesis to restore balance in the world. Hubris wasn't just a sin, it was an offense against cosmic order. For the ancient Greeks, these stories of divine punishment served as warnings for everyone in the society. Excessive pride, boasting, or any form of defiance against the gods would lead to disastrous consequences. The Greeks believed that humility before the gods was not only a personal virtue but a social imperative. To challenge the gods was to risk not just personal punishment, but also the stability of the community. Society was held together by this shared belief. The gods had to be honored, and humility was the price of peace and prosperity. Hubris, therefore, wasn't just a moral failing, it was a social crime, one that could bring about the downfall of the individual and the city. So far, we've explored how religion was not just a private matter but a public one, deeply embedded in every action, decision, and law. Religion governed not only the personal actions of the Greeks but also their public rituals and the very way they structured their society. However, the Greeks didn't just care about the divine in their daily life. They also placed immense value on the perfection of the human body and the connection between physical strength, mental discipline, and virtue. This leads us into the realm of the gymnasium, a crucial institution that was integral to both physical and intellectual training in ancient Greece. In ancient Greece, the gymnasium wasn't just a place to work out, it was a sacred space where physical fitness, mental training, and spiritual growth all came together. Here, men exercised in the nude, not for the sake of modesty or practicality, but to celebrate the human form in its purest, most natural state. It was a tribute to the gods and the virtues they represented: strength, beauty, and honor. Unlike modern gyms, which focus solely on physical development, the Greek gymnasium was a holistic environment that also nurtured intellectual development. Here, physical exercise was seen as inseparable from the cultivation of wisdom, philosophy, and personal virtue. Philosophers like Socrates and Plato were known to debate and discuss while walking through the gymnasium, as physical exercise was seen as a way to strengthen the mind just as much as the body. The gymnasium was the place where one learned not only the art of war but also the art of living virtuously. It was in the gymnasium that young men were trained to become full citizens, developing their bodies, their minds, and their sense of honor. This connection between the physical and intellectual spheres was rooted in the idea that a well-rounded person who excelled both in body and mind would be a better and more virtuous member of society. Now, the importance of physical excellence wasn't limited to the gymnasium. It extended to the most prestigious event in the Greek world, the Olympic Games. These ancient games were the most famous events in ancient Greek culture. Weren't just about athletic achievement, they were religious ceremonies and deeply intertwined with the Greeks' spiritual beliefs. The games were dedicated to Zeus, the chief god of the Greek pantheon, and held every 4 years at Olympia, a sanctuary that honored him. These games were as much about divine favor as they were about showcasing human excellence. Participating in the Olympics wasn't just an individual pursuit for fame or glory. Athletes entered the games with the belief that they were offering their skills, their strength, and their endurance as a tribute to the gods, and in return, they sought Zeus's approval and blessings. The athletes were seen as representatives of the gods' ideals, embodying courage, discipline, and virtue. Winning an Olympic event was considered a direct sign of divine favor, and it wasn't just the athletes who reaped the rewards. Victory brought honor and prosperity to their entire city-state. The Olympic Games were not a mere sporting event, but a grand religious festival. The sacrifices to Zeus were performed before the games even began. A bull was slaughtered, and its blood was offered as a way to ensure the god's blessings on the athletes, the spectators, and the competition itself. Even the Olympic flame, which was lit at Olympia and carried from one place to another, symbolizing the spirit of Zeus, was an important ritualistic act, reminding everyone that this was not just about human achievement, but also about the divine will that governed all. The Olympic Games were structured to celebrate human excellence, while simultaneously acknowledging that such excellence was a gift from the gods. This connection was not just symbolic, it was real and binding. To do well in the Olympics was to honor the gods, but to fail, especially publicly, could be seen as an indication that the gods were unhappy, and in some cases, this could even result in punishment. For the ancient Greeks, there was no separating the physical from the spiritual. Excellence in any form was a direct relationship with the divine, and the Olympics were the ultimate expression of that relationship. For the ancient Greeks, the pursuit of athletic excellence was deeply tied to their moral and religious beliefs. This idea was rooted in the concept of arete, which roughly translates to excellence or virtue. However, arete wasn't just about personal achievement or success in the physical realm. It was about living a life of honor, integrity, and discipline that reflected the values of the gods. The Greeks believed that human excellence was a way to reflect the divine ideals embodied by the gods. A strong body and a sharp mind weren't just tools for personal growth. They were gifts from the gods, and cultivating them was considered a form of worship. This is why the gymnasium, the athletic competitions, and the Olympic Games were so important. They weren't merely places to compete, they were sacred spaces where the body and spirit were honed together. Athletes sought to honor the gods through their actions, their dedication, and their pursuit of arete, which in turn made their victories meaningful beyond the personal. In fact, many Greek athletes didn't compete for money or material wealth. The ultimate reward was not a gold medal or a prize purse. It was the respect of the gods and the favor they bestowed upon their city-state, their families, and themselves. Winning the Olympics wasn't just about securing personal fame, it was about making your city and your god proud. The Olympic victors were celebrated as heroes, and their names were immortalized in statues, temples, and even in poetry. Athletes who competed in the Games were often viewed as living examples of the qualities the Greeks revered: strength, speed, courage, and honor. In a sense, these athletes were not only representing themselves, they were representing the highest ideals of Greek society. Victory in the Olympic Games was not just about athletic prowess. It was a spiritual victory, a confirmation that the athlete's life was in alignment with the virtues of the gods. To the Greeks, this divine connection to athletic success was so powerful that they believed athletes could achieve immortality through their excellence. Winning wasn't just a fleeting achievement, it was a way to join the gods in their eternal pursuit of excellence. Even if their names faded from human memory, their victory was celebrated for all time as a tribute to the gods, the highest expression of human potential and the ultimate sign of arete. As the sun begins to set and the cool Mediterranean evening sets in, the rhythm of life in ancient Greece takes on a more relaxed, yet still highly ritualistic tone. After a day filled with religious duties, athletic pursuits, and community obligations, the symposium becomes the focal point of the evening. A symposium wasn't just a casual dinner, it was a philosophical gathering, a place for educated men to come together, drink wine, and engage in deep intellectual debates. But even here, in the midst of socializing and merrymaking, religion played a central role. The evening always began with a ritual, a prayer to the gods, particularly to Dionysus, the god of wine, revelry, and ecstasy. As dusk settles over the city of Athens, the day's rituals and duties come to an end. But the evening brings with it a different kind of ritualistic celebration, the symposium. This wasn't just a casual dinner or a party, but a deeply philosophical gathering where men of intellect and status would come together to discuss the important issues of the day, from politics and philosophy to art and society. But just as with any activity in the ancient Greek world, the gods were never far from their thoughts. The evening would always begin with rituals of reverence, prayers, and offerings to the gods, especially Dionysus, the god of wine, ecstasy, and revelry. Wine, the center of the symposium, was always diluted with water, a sign of moderation, as drinking unmixed wine was seen as barbaric. Before the wine flowed freely, the host would offer a libation, a small pour of wine or water, into a sacred bowl or onto the ground, invoking the god's favor for the evening. The gathering would pause for a prayer, offering gratitude to Dionysus for the pleasure of the wine and asking for divine protection through the night. This ritual wasn't simply a formal gesture, it was a deeply ingrained part of the ancient Greek way of life. Just as in the morning offerings to the household gods, the symposium reminded its participants that all things, even the pleasures of life, were only possible through the favor of the gods. The Greeks believed that if they didn't acknowledge the divine in all aspects of their lives, they might provoke the wrath of the gods, and they'd never want to risk that. As the wine began to flow and the conversations turned to debates and philosophical questions, the gods remained an ever-present force in their discussions. The symposium was as much about engaging the mind as it was about paying homage to the divine. During these philosophical discussions, it wasn't uncommon for participants to share stories, both historical and mythological, that exemplified the lessons they believed were important for understanding the world. One story that always seemed to come up in such discussions was the tale of a merchant, a man who, in his hubris, was punished by Poseidon, the god of the seas. The merchant, a man known for his arrogance and boastfulness, was a successful trader who prided himself on his cleverness and ability to navigate the treacherous seas. He had accumulated great wealth, and with it, an inflated sense of self-importance. One day, the merchant, growing overconfident, declared that his success was due to his own skill and hard work, and not because of Poseidon's favor. He publicly claimed that the gods had nothing to do with his prosperity. He alone was responsible for his success. This, of course, was a blasphemous act in the eyes of the gods, and especially Poseidon, who controlled the seas and all who traveled upon them. The gods, particularly the Olympian deities, demanded that mortals not only acknowledge their power, but also show proper reverence. For this merchant, however, hubris, excessive pride, or arrogance had taken root, and he ignored the essential truth that his success was, in fact, only possible with the gods' blessings. The very next day, as he set sail once again, the seas suddenly grew violent. A fierce storm whipped up out of nowhere, and Poseidon struck with divine fury, sinking the merchant's ship. Despite the merchant's skill and experience, it was Poseidon's wrath that proved to be the ultimate force. The merchant's overconfidence in his own abilities was shattered by the divine power he had so arrogantly dismissed. The storm not only destroyed his ship but also destroyed his wealth. This story was always shared in the symposiums as a cautionary tale. Hubris, the arrogance of challenging the gods, was the gravest sin. The merchant's failure to acknowledge the divine in his life led directly to his downfall, and his tragic fate served as a powerful reminder to everyone present. No matter how much success or wealth one might achieve, it is always the gods who hold ultimate power, and no one is beyond their judgment. As we can see, the rituals of the symposium and the story of the arrogant merchant serve as constant reminders in Greek society that humility, reverence, and respect for the divine were the foundations of everything. In the Greek world, hubris never went unpunished, and even the greatest human achievements could be torn down by the whims of the gods. The evening carried on with intellectual debates, but always with the underlying understanding that humans must always remember their place within the greater divine hierarchy. The gods were both omnipotent and omnipresent, and no matter how much a person achieved, they could not escape the will of the gods. The Greek way of life was shaped by a humble acknowledgement of this divine authority, whether in the sports arenas, the gymnasiums, or the symposia. The success and safety of each individual were always tied to their recognition of the gods' power. As the night wore on, the symposium would wind down, but the final message was clear. Human existence was fragile, and true safety and success were only attainable when one understood their place beneath the gods. Without this awareness, the divine could bring both blessings and devastating consequences. The gods were not abstract beings to be ignored. They were real, ever-present forces that shaped every aspect of life. In this world, a person could only find peace, prosperity, and protection by living in harmony with the divine order, knowing that no matter how much one accomplished, the gods were always the ultimate authority. This transition from the day's duties to the evening's social gatherings highlights how deeply religion was woven into the fabric of Greek life. Even in moments of revelry and intellectual exchange, it reinforces the idea that hubris, overstepping one's bounds and defying the gods, was not just an individual flaw, but a social transgression that could bring about disastrous consequences. The evening thus serves as a closing reminder. Only those who respect their place in the world and in the cosmos governed by the gods can truly live in peace and safety. As the evening unfolds in ancient Greece, the day's activities draw to a close, and the rituals of daily life begin to shift toward the sacred realm of sleep. The Greeks, like every aspect of their existence, never allowed even their moments of rest to be free from divine influence. Just as they began their day with offerings to the gods, They would end it with prayers and rituals of thanksgiving before drifting into sleep. In their minds, there was no such thing as a purely secular existence. Everything, from waking life to sleep, was under the watchful eyes of the gods. As the evening descended upon ancient Greece, the daily rhythms of life began to quiet. The sounds of the bustling city, the hum of conversations, and the activities of the day all tapered off, giving way to the more introspective hours of night. But for the Greeks, night was never a time to simply rest. It was another sacred period of the day, where the gods could intervene, and the lines between the human world and the divine realm remained ever present. The notion of sleeping without the gods' watchful eyes was anathema to them. Before retiring for the night, ancient Greeks would engage in a final ritual to acknowledge the gods' presence and ask for protection during their hours of sleep. In most households, this took the form of a prayer or a final offering to the household gods' figures like Hestia, the goddess of the hearth, Hermes, the protector of travelers, and Zeus, the king of gods, who was invoked to keep them safe through the night. This prayer, like all others, wasn't a mere formality. It was a sincere request for divine favor and safety, as the night was not seen as a time of separation from the divine, but a time when the gods could still influence the course of their lives. The prayer before sleep often involved a ritual of gratitude, where the Greeks would thank the gods for their blessings throughout the day and ask for protection, guidance, or even forgiveness if they had wronged anyone or neglected their duties to the gods. These offerings were typically small wine, olive oil, or even breadcrumbs, but they held great meaning, as they symbolized the bond between mortals and gods. The act of offering a portion of what they had, even if meager, was a way of acknowledging their dependence on the divine forces that shaped every aspect of their lives. There was no normal night for the Greeks, as ritual was just as much a part of their rest as it was of their work. With the night came sleep, and for the ancient Greeks, sleep was never a time for disconnection. It was, in fact, a time when the gods could enter directly into their lives. Morpheus, the god of dreams, was the divine ruler of the sleep realm, and it was he who guided and shaped the dreams of mortals. However, it wasn't just sleep for the sake of rest, it was divine communication. The Greeks believed that dreams were a medium through which the gods sent messages, warnings, guidance, and sometimes even prophecies. When a person dreamed, it wasn't just a reflection of their thoughts or desires, but a divine interaction, a conversation with the gods. The ancient Greeks didn't see their dreams as idle fantasies. They saw them as sacred visions that could reveal their future, answer their prayers, or even warn them of impending danger. They firmly believed that the gods could send them prophetic dreams, where deities might appear in symbolic forms or direct ones, guiding them to act or making them aware of a critical decision. One well-known story involves King Croesus of Lydia, who, after dreaming of his son's death, was warned by a seer that his actions could lead to this dream's fulfillment. Despite the warning, Croesus ignored the divine message, and in the end, his son met the tragic fate foretold in his dream. Such tales weren't just myths, they were lessons in the importance of listening to divine signs. In some cases, the Greeks would even visit temples dedicated to gods like Asclepius, the god of healing, in hopes of receiving divine visions or dreams that would offer solutions to their physical or emotional ailments. These dreams were thought to be guided by the gods, and those who received them were often regarded with great reverence and respect. For the ancient Greeks, the concept of a secular world, a space where religion did not shape every action, was non-existent. Their worldview did not divide life into sacred and profane, or religious and secular categories, as we often do today. Instead, they saw the divine as interwoven into every aspect of their lives, from the moment they woke up to the moment they fell asleep, and even in their dreams. Every part of their daily routine, whether they were working, eating, talking, or even sleeping, was guided and influenced by the gods. Nothing was too small or insignificant to be left outside the domain of the divine. For instance, the Greeks didn't just offer prayers and sacrifices at grand temples or religious festivals. They did so throughout the day, in the marketplaces, in their homes, and even in the streets. Shrines and altars were scattered throughout the cities, and people would stop to make offerings or acknowledge the gods at every opportunity. These small rituals were as much a part of life as working or eating, and there was no moment in the day where the gods were not acknowledged. This pervasive presence of the gods ensured that every action, no matter how mundane, was seen as part of a cosmic order. The Greeks lived their lives consciously aware of the divine forces around them, understanding that the gods were always present, whether they were looking for them or not. This belief made the world of the ancient Greeks deeply enchanted. Everything had meaning, and every experience carried the potential to be divinely significant. In the ancient Greek mindset, nothing was ever just physical, whether it was a disaster, a miracle, or even a simple interaction between people. It all had deeper divine meanings. Their dreams, their waking lives, and their prayers were all seen as divinely guided, and their entire worldview was shaped by the belief that the gods watched over every detail. There was no escape from the presence of the gods, not in waking life, and certainly not in dreams. Everything was sacred, everything was a message from the divine. As the dawn breaks and the first rays of sunlight filter through the ancient olive groves, you begin your day with a quiet sense of purpose. In ancient Greece, life was deeply entwined with the natural world, and nature itself was seen as a canvas upon which the gods painted their influence. The Greeks didn't just believe in the gods, they believed that the gods inhabited every part of the world around them, from the towering mountains to the flowing rivers, from the sacred trees to the quiet stones. Nature was alive with divine presence, and you were about to embark on a journey that would make that presence feel real in every sense. As you rise early in the morning, the air is still crisp and cool, and the golden rays of the sun filter gently through the towering olive trees. Your task for the day is a simple yet deeply sacred one. Collect water from the sacred spring. The spring lies just outside the city, nestled between thick groves and rolling hills. It's a place of purity and reverence, where the gods and nature meet, and it's considered to be the dwelling place of nymphs, spirits, who govern the natural world. To the ancient Greeks, this spring wasn't just a source of water. It was a living entity, a sacred site, a divine connection to the gods. As you walk down the familiar path toward the spring, the sounds of nature greet you: birds singing, the rustling of leaves, and the gurgling of the water itself. The air smells of wildflowers, and as you approach the spring, the peaceful atmosphere fills you with reverence. You're not just collecting water, you're taking part in a ritual that has been practiced by generations before you. The water here is believed to carry the divine blessing of the nymphs, who inhabit the spring and keep it pure. The nymphs, beautiful and mysterious nature spirits, are the caretakers of the rivers, springs, trees, and other natural features of the world. It is believed that they watch over the water's flow and ensure that it remains sacred, untainted by mortal hands. As you dip your vessel into the clear water, you remember the many stories told about how these nymphs have healed the sick, offered guidance, and bestowed blessings upon those who honor them. The divine energy of the nymphs is said to be embedded in every drop of water, making it a powerful source of healing and spiritual connection. As you kneel beside the spring to fill your jar, you overhear an elderly woman speaking to a young child beside her. She recounts a story, a miraculous healing that took place many years ago. It is a story that has been shared around the village for generations, passed down as a reminder of the divine powers that reside in this sacred place. The woman recalls her childhood when she was blind, unable to see the beautiful world around her. Her mother, desperate to restore her sight, brought her to this very spring. For 9 consecutive days, they bathed her eyes with the sacred water, each time praying to the nymphs for healing. On the 9th day, something miraculous happened. As the water touched her eyes, she felt a sensation like a veil being lifted. Slowly, her vision returned, and she could see once more. She shares this story with such conviction and humility that it feels as if the gods themselves are still present in this place. The story of her healing becomes more than just a personal anecdote. It is a testament to the divine presence and power of the nymphs, who are believed to bestow their favor and healing abilities on those who approach with faith and respect. The woman's eyes shine as she speaks, her gratitude and reverence clear in every word she says. This story, though it may seem extraordinary, is not unique. Many people come to the spring seeking healing, guidance, or simply the presence of the divine. The Greeks believed that the gods were always watching, always intervening in human affairs, whether through the natural world or through personal experiences like this one. To them, the line between the natural and the divine was non-existent. Everything was connected: human suffering, divine intervention, and the power of nature. As you stand up and take your water, you glance around the spring, taking in the sacred grove that surrounds it. The trees, the rocks, the flowing river, and the very earth beneath your feet are not simply natural objects. They are all embodiments of divine power. Every element of nature in ancient Greece was believed to house a spirit, a god, or a nymph. The sacredness of the natural world was all-encompassing, and the gods were thought to be present in every stone, every river, and every tree. In particular, the trees around the spring, which had stood for centuries, were sacred. They weren't just part of the landscape. They were believed to be the physical manifestations of the gods themselves. In Greek mythology, many gods were associated with specific trees: Zeus with the oak, Athena with the olive tree, and Apollo with the laurel. These trees were considered sacred and were worshipped as living gods. The very air you breathe in this grove feels charged with divine energy, and the ancient stone altars and shrines that dot the landscape serve as reminders of the deep connection between the gods and nature. Even the river that flows through this area is sacred. In ancient Greece, rivers were often personified as gods or spirits, each with their own powers and responsibilities. The nymphs, guardians of the rivers, were said to guide the water's course and ensure it flowed smoothly and beneficially. The Greeks would often make offerings at the river banks to honor these water spirits and ask for blessings on their travels or for favorable harvests. For the ancient Greeks, there was no separation between the divine and the natural. The gods didn't dwell in some faraway realm. Separated from the mortal world, they were actively present in the natural environment that surrounded the people. Whether in the sacred spring, the towering oak trees, or the rushing rivers, the gods were everywhere, and every part of nature was infused with their spiritual presence. The act of going to the sacred spring, of offering prayers to the nymphs, was not just a pragmatic task. It was a ritual that connected the mortal world with the divine realm, a reminder that the gods' power was always at work in the world around them. As you walk away from the spring, your vessel filled with sacred water, you carry with you not just a physical necessity, but also the blessing of the gods. The journey to the spring, the divine presence you felt, and the stories of healing and favor remind you that in this world, the boundaries between the human, the divine, and the natural are blurred. Everything is interconnected, and the gods are always watching, guiding, and shaping the course of life. As your journey through ancient Greece continues, you come across a sacred temple, a place where both medicine and faith intertwine. This is the temple of Asclepius, the god of healing, located outside the city. The temple is a sanctuary not just for prayers and offerings, but also for the treatment of illnesses. The Greeks believed that health was as much a matter of divine favor as it was about physical treatment. The idea that the gods influenced every part of life, including health, was an essential part of their worldview. As you walk through the streets of ancient Greece, you arrive at the Temple of Asclepius, a sacred and revered site. This isn't just a temple for worship, it's a place of healing, where the gods and medicine coexist in a profound way. Asclepius, the god of medicine and healing, is honored here, and his temple is considered a sanctuary where the divine and medical worlds meet. The temple, located at the edge of the city or sometimes in quieter, more secluded areas, is a massive structure. Its tall columns reaching for the sky. The air is thick with incense, and the hum of prayers and chants can be heard as the faithful gather in reverence. The moment you enter the temple's grounds, there's an overwhelming sense of peace and serenity, but also a quiet tension. This is a place where lives can be changed. Not only will you find healers and physicians here, but also the sick and the desperate, all seeking the favor of Asclepius. Inside the temple, the rituals are spiritual and medical in equal measure. For the people of ancient Greece, healing wasn't just about medical knowledge or treatments. It was a matter of the gods' intervention. Asclepius was believed to possess the ability to cure the sick through both divine touch and guidance. One of the most unique aspects of healing at the temple was the ritual of sacred sleep. Patients seeking healing would spend the night in the temple, sleeping on the floor, hoping for a divine visitation. It was believed that the god Asclepius, or one of his healing attendants, often depicted as a serpent, would appear to them in their dreams, revealing the cure for their ailments. This dream-inspired cure wasn't simply a vision, it was the divine wisdom of the god, guiding them to health. Before sleeping, patients would undergo purification rituals, including bathing in sacred waters or anointing themselves with sacred oils. This cleansing process was seen as a way to prepare both the body and soul to receive Asclepius's healing power. The temple priests and priestesses would often provide special potions or elixirs made from herbs and other natural remedies. But the true healing was believed to come through dreams and visions. As you sit quietly in the temple, the energy of faith and hope fills the air. You notice the many offerings left in the temple's inner sanctum. Votive plaques, small figurines, and sculptures of body parts, hands, feet, eyes left behind by those who had been healed by Asclepius. These were offerings of gratitude, symbolic of the parts of their body that had been restored to health. The serpent, which was sacred to Asclepius, plays a crucial role in the temple's rituals. Asclepius himself is often depicted holding a staff entwined with a serpent, a symbol that is still widely recognized today. The serpent represents healing, rebirth, and renewal, all central to Asclepius's power. The serpents that slithered around the temple were considered to be divine messengers and were believed to bring blessings of health. If you were lucky, a serpent might even touch you, further solidifying your connection to the healing power of the gods. The Temple of Asclepius is not just a place of worship, but also a medical sanctuary. Physicians, often trained in both the healing arts and religious rituals, would work alongside the priests, using their knowledge of herbal remedies, surgical procedures, and diagnostic techniques. This combination of medical practice and spiritual ritual made the healing process deeply holistic. The priests didn't just pray over their patients, they also offered practical remedies and conducted treatments using the herbs and resources found in the surrounding area. The people who entered the temple came seeking more than just physical cures. They sought spiritual healing as well. The belief that the gods controlled their fate, including their health, meant that healing was as much about restoring their connection to the divine as it was about restoring their bodies. Those who left the temple, healed by the divine presence of Asclepius, felt that they had been touched by the gods themselves, both physically and spiritually. It's here that the true beauty of ancient Greek medicine comes to light, the combination of faith and scientific practice. While Hippocrates, the father of modern medicine, is renowned for his contributions to clinical diagnosis and treatment, he never completely separated medicine from the divine. Although he emphasized the importance of observation, natural remedies, and the study of diseases, even Hippocrates recognized that healing often required divine intervention. In fact, temples like the one dedicated to Asclepius were the birthplaces of what we might now call medical ethics and patient care. But they were also spiritual centers. Physicians would perform rituals, make offerings, and even incorporate prayers into their treatments. This holistic view of healing was so deeply rooted in Greek culture that medical professionals didn't just study human anatomy or disease, they also had to study the religious and spiritual dimensions of healing. It was believed that an illness could be a result of divine displeasure, and therefore the cure was often seen as something that required spiritual restoration in addition to physical healing. This is why visiting temples like the Temple of Asclepius became as common as visiting a physician's office today. The Greeks understood that health was not simply a biological phenomenon, it was intertwined with the whims of the gods and the natural balance of the world. In this world, medicine and faith were not separate disciplines. They were two sides of the same coin, offering people a way to understand their world, both its natural and supernatural aspects. To cure an illness was not just to treat the body, but to restore balance with the gods. Even the greatest minds of the time understood that health, just like fate, was something beyond full human control. As you reflect on your visit to the Temple of Asclepius, it becomes clear that for the ancient Greeks, healing was a sacred act, one deeply influenced by both the divine and the natural worlds. Medicine and faith were not separate, they were intertwined in a delicate dance. The Greeks' belief in the divine role in healing wasn't just a superstition, it was a comprehensive worldview that sought to understand the body, the spirit, and the gods. Their medical practices, deeply rooted in both science and spirituality, laid the foundations for many aspects of modern medicine, but also reminded us that we, as humans, have always been vulnerable to forces beyond our understanding. As you walk away from the temple, the serpent of Asclepius carved into the stone seems to follow you, a reminder of the complex relationship between the human and the divine. In ancient Greece, it wasn't enough to simply seek scientific answers. One also had to acknowledge and honor the gods, whose favor or anger could change the course of life. It is a world where every illness is a message from the gods, and every cure is a divine gift. As the sun rises on another day in ancient Greece, the ever-present influence of the gods continues to shape the lives of its people. We've already seen how faith and religion are deeply intertwined with personal well-being and daily rituals. But when it comes to matters of national importance, such as war and military campaigns, this divine influence becomes even more powerful and urgent. In ancient Greece, every military campaign was deeply connected to the will of the gods. Before launching an attack or embarking on a journey, leaders and generals would first seek the divine will through omens and sacrifices. It wasn't enough to rely on tactical strategy alone, the gods had to be consulted. This intertwining of religion and warfare is not just a cultural norm, it is a core aspect of Greek life. The practice of divination, interpreting signs from the gods, was crucial for any military leader preparing for battle. Warriors and generals would consult oracles, soothsayers, and priests to seek divine guidance before proceeding with any significant action. Omens, such as the flight of birds, the appearance of certain animals, or even the entrails of sacrificial animals, were closely examined to predict the success or failure of the coming campaign. Perhaps the most famous example of this practice was the consultation of the Delphic oracle, where leaders sought prophetic advice from the priestess Pythia, who was believed to be the mouthpiece of the god Apollo. The response from the oracle was considered sacred, and once given, was taken as a direct command from the gods. The Greeks believed that if the omens or oracles were favorable, the gods were supporting their efforts, and victory was almost assured. But if the signs were unfavorable, the consequences could be dire. In the event of failure, the explanation was clear. The gods had not granted their favor. No defeat on the battlefield could ever be blamed solely on the skill of the opposing forces or the mistakes of the general. If the Greeks lost, it was because the gods had turned against them. A battle lost wasn't just a military failure, it was a reflection of divine displeasure, a sign that the gods were not pleased with the people's actions, decisions, or the way they had conducted themselves. This belief was reinforced by the concept of hubris, or excessive pride. To challenge the gods, to ignore their will, or to assume one could act without divine approval was the greatest offense. Hubris led to nemesis, divine retribution, and the Greeks firmly believed that if they faced defeat, it was because they had angered the gods through arrogance or disrespect. One of the most striking aspects of the ancient Greek world is that politics and religion were inseparable. Everything from military strategy to public policy was viewed through the lens of the gods' will. Political leaders, much like generals, were expected to demonstrate piety and humility before the gods. Political power was not simply a human achievement, it was granted by the divine, and maintaining that power required ongoing sacrifice, respect, and rituals to ensure the gods' favor. The belief that political legitimacy came from the gods meant that every major decision in Athens or Sparta, whether military or civilian, had religious overtones. A king or general might decide to go to war, but it was always subject to the will of the gods, as expressed through omens or oracles. Similarly, laws, policies, and even the leadership of a city-state were seen as being ultimately under divine jurisdiction. In this deeply religious world, the notion of secular politics, where decisions are made independent of divine will, didn't exist. Political leaders were not just statesmen but also spiritual figures, tasked with maintaining not only the well-being of their people but also the relationship between humans and the gods. The actions of those in power were considered sacred, as was their duty to ensure that their city-state remained in favor with the gods. Thus, war itself was never merely a matter of land or power. Military conquests were seen as part of the grand divine plan, and as such, the Greek armies were always on a mission sanctioned by the gods. Every victory in battle was attributed to divine favor, while every defeat was seen as a sign that the gods were displeased, punishing the people for their transgressions. To go to war without the gods' blessing, to act without first consulting the oracles or conducting proper sacrifices, was considered an invitation for failure. The soldiers, like their generals, were not only fighting for their city-state survival, but for the approval and protection of the gods. This understanding of war as a sacred duty ensured that each conflict was imbued with religious meaning, further blurring the lines between military, political, and religious life. The inseparable link between religion and politics meant that no matter how great a city-state's military might, they were always vulnerable to divine retribution. For instance, the famous Sicilian expedition during the Peloponnesian War was a disastrous failure for Athens, which many believed was a result of the gods' punishment for the Athenians' arrogance. The military leaders had pushed too far, too fast, without honoring the will of the gods, and as a result, they paid a heavy price for their hubris. The gods' role in war, then, was not only as guides and protectors, but as the ultimate enforcers of justice, holding the Greek people accountable for their actions. A victory was blessed by the gods, but defeat was their wrath. To challenge the gods was to invite catastrophe, not only in battle but in the very fabric of society. The interweaving of politics and religion in war ensured that the divine presence was ever present in both the realms of power and the realms of belief, making everything from military strategy to public law a reflection of the gods' will. As we've seen in the previous sections, the gods were deeply woven into every aspect of ancient Greek life: military decisions, daily rituals, even the most personal experiences, from the moment a Greek child was born until the very end of their life. The gods were seen as guardians, guides, and arbiters of fate. However, as we move deeper into the intellectual heart of ancient Greece, we encounter thinkers who dared to question the very nature of the gods, the divine, and the human experience. One such figure, Socrates, stood out as a beacon of intellectual inquiry, and in many ways, his life and death exemplify the complex relationship between philosophy, religion, and the state. Socrates was known for questioning everything, even the divine. Socrates, one of the most famous philosophers of all time, became notorious not only for his Socratic method, his method of questioning to stimulate critical thinking, but also for his disregard for the traditional gods of Athens. He famously questioned the very nature of divinity, asking whether the gods truly embodied the qualities that humans should strive for. He even went so far as to challenge the idea that the gods were infallible, a stance that was revolutionary and, in the eyes of many, deeply dangerous. Socrates was ultimately accused of impiety, a charge of disrespecting the gods of the city and introducing new gods. His ideas and his method, which encouraged questioning established beliefs and norms, were seen as a direct threat to the religious and political order. As a result, Socrates was sentenced to death, drinking the hemlock as a punishment for his perceived blasphemy. The trial and execution of Socrates marked a defining moment in the relationship between philosophy and religion in ancient Greece. While the gods were meant to be revered without question, Socrates' philosophical inquiries undermined the foundations of Greek religious life. His willingness to question and critique the gods did not sit well with the powerful forces that maintained social and religious order in Athens. While Socrates' challenge to the gods put him at odds with Athenian society, the idea of self-restraint and knowledge of one's limits was still a deeply held value in Greek culture. This concept is encapsulated in the idea of sophrosyne, a Greek word often translated as moderation, self-control, or virtue. In a world where the gods were seen as both guides and punishers, understanding one's place in the grand scheme of things was essential for maintaining harmony between mortals and the divine. Sophrosyne encouraged individuals to recognize their own limitations, to acknowledge that while humans could strive for greatness, they were still mortal and should not seek to surpass the gods or defy the natural order. This concept was closely linked to the idea of hubris, or excessive pride, which was viewed as the greatest sin in Greek philosophy. Hubris was the act of thinking oneself equal to the gods, of challenging fate or nature's course. In the world of the gods, hubris always led to nemesis, divine retribution, for overstepping one's boundaries. Greek thinkers like Plato, Aristotle, and even Socrates emphasized self-awareness as a key virtue. The Delphic oracle's famous injunction, "Know thyself," spoke directly to this ideal. It was a reminder to recognize one's place in the world, to understand the limits of human knowledge and power, and to avoid the dangerous temptation of believing that one could outstrip the gods or the natural order. In a society where gods were perceived as the ultimate rulers of the cosmos, defying fate or seeing oneself as a deity was not only disrespectful, it was foolish and perilous. The ancient Greeks believed that fate was determined by the gods, and that no matter how much effort one put into their individual achievements, their destiny was ultimately in the hands of the divine. The myth of Oedipus, for example, illustrates the consequences of trying to avoid fate. Despite his efforts to escape his prophecy, Oedipus's downfall was inevitable, and his tragedy was a direct result of his attempts to outsmart the gods and change his fate. This myth, like many others, served as a cautionary tale. Humans may strive for greatness, but they must do so with the understanding that they cannot control their fate, nor can they ever be more than human. The Greek worldview did not allow for human arrogance or the idea that one could attain divinity. The gods were immortal, all-powerful beings who could bestow blessings or punishments at will. Humans, on the other hand, were meant to acknowledge their mortality, their dependence on the gods, and their role within the larger cosmic order. Anyone who forgot their place, who tried to defy the gods, was bound to face the consequences of their hubris. In the end, the moral and philosophical frameworks of ancient Greece were deeply shaped by the gods, and the recognition that humanity's fate was always intertwined with the divine. From Socrates' questioning of divinity to the concept of sophrosyne, which called for moderation and self-awareness, the Greeks understood that their relationship with the gods was at the center of their lives. The gods were not abstract concepts, but real forces that influenced everything from personal conduct to political decisions to military campaigns. And above all, the Greeks understood that to be human was to recognize that the divine was always watching, guiding, and judging. In a world where knowledge of oneself and respect for the gods' power were paramount, the ancient Greeks created a society where the divine and the mortal realms were inseparable. To live well was to understand one's place in the grand design, to follow the laws of the gods, and to never forget that human greatness, no matter how profound, could never rival the power of the divine. As we move through the moral and intellectual frameworks of ancient Greece, it's essential to understand the deep connection between rituals, family life, and religion. Every stage of a Greek person's life, from birth to death, was marked by specific ceremonies and gods who watched over each transition. The life cycle wasn't just a biological journey, it was a sacred narrative, with divine forces presiding over every moment. Just as the gods governed the cosmos, they also governed the intimate, everyday moments that made up the human experience. The relationship between humans and the gods wasn't limited to grandiose temples or epic sacrifices. It was profoundly personal, with the divine embedded in the very fabric of family life. The Greeks didn't view life as a solitary experience, but as an ongoing relationship with the divine. Every stage of life, whether it was the birth of a child, the coming of age of a youth, a marriage ceremony, or the rituals of death, involved specific rites and deities that guided and protected the individual through these critical transitions. At birth, children were not just celebrated by family and friends, they were also welcomed into the care of the gods. A newborn was often given to Apollo, the god of healing, to ensure a healthy life. Families would offer small sacrifices, such as honey cakes or milk, to the gods, asking for protection over the child's growth. The child's guardian deity could even be chosen through divination, determining which god would offer the most protection and blessings. As children grew, the rites of passage became more pronounced. Young boys, upon reaching adulthood, participated in the ephebic oath, a public declaration of their readiness to serve as soldiers and citizens, pledging loyalty to their city and the gods. This was an important part of the Greek process of becoming a man as it signified their official entry into adult life, where both military service and civic duties awaited. Girls, on the other hand, underwent the Artia ritual dedicated to Artemis, marking their passage into womanhood and ensuring their health and fertility. The goddess Artemis, protector of women and children, was especially honored during this time. Marriage was perhaps the most sacred of all life's transitions. Greek marriages were not only a union of individuals but of families and communities, and it was also an act of appeasing the gods, especially Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty. The marriage ritual involved prayers for the couple's fertility, prosperity, and happiness, often taking place in the temple of Aphrodite or other deities associated with love and relationships. Finally, death was viewed as a transition into the afterlife rather than the end of life itself. Upon death, a complex series of funeral rites was performed to ensure the deceased's safe passage to the underworld and the continued favor of the gods. Hades and Persephone, rulers of the underworld, were invoked, and offerings were made to appease their domain. The dead were believed to still influence the living, and without proper rituals, their souls would be restless. As such, the family was responsible for maintaining a connection with their ancestors through regular offerings and ceremonies. Greek religious life, though predominantly male-dominated in public affairs, also recognized the critical role of goddesses in shaping the lives of women and guiding their personal journeys. Women's religious lives were deeply intertwined with their identity and role in the family. Artemis, the goddess of chastity, was especially important during a girl's coming of age. She represented purity, strength, and protection, and her worship marked the transition from girlhood to womanhood. Young women would offer prayers to Artemis, seeking her favor as they moved into adulthood, often participating in rituals or festivals dedicated to her. In addition to Artemis, Demeter, the goddess of agriculture and motherhood, was revered for her role in fertility, childbirth, and the nurturing of families. Women invoked Demeter to bless them with healthy children and good harvests. Her festivals, particularly the Thesmophoria, were exclusively for women, during which they would retreat from their homes to honor Demeter and celebrate their roles as nurturers and caretakers. Finally, Aphrodite, the goddess of love, beauty, and sexuality, played a crucial role in the lives of women, especially in marriage and romantic relationships. Aphrodite's divine power was seen as the force that kept marriages together and ensured love flourished. Women offered her prayers for beauty, romantic success, and the prosperity of their relationships. Everything in the family was viewed through a sacred lens. From birth to death, the home was considered a temple to the gods, with each act of domestic life reflecting a deep reverence for divine forces. Family activities were often ritualistic, with daily prayers to the household gods such as Hestia, the goddess of the hearth, who was honored daily to ensure the family's well-being. Zeus, the king of the gods, was also often honored as the protector of the household, ensuring justice and harmony. The family was not just a social unit but a sacred entity. The paterfamilias, the male head of the household, was responsible for maintaining the spiritual and physical health of the home. This included making offerings to the gods to ensure the protection of the family and its future generations. Family members, especially women, were expected to participate actively in these rituals, and the home was often filled with small altars, statues of gods, and offerings to keep divine favor within the household. In Greek culture, the family and religion were so intertwined that family life itself was considered sacred. Rituals performed within the home were as important as those performed in public temples. Every meal, birth, and death was an opportunity to honor the gods, to seek their favor, and to maintain harmony in the family. Whether offering daily prayers, performing rites of passage, or making funeral offerings, The Greek family ensured that they upheld their religious obligations to the gods. These religious obligations not only preserved their standing with the divine, but also solidified the moral foundation of Greek society itself. In a world where divine retribution could come at any time, maintaining favor with the gods was seen as essential for survival both on a personal and familial level. As we can see, the ancient Greeks didn't merely coexist with their gods, they lived with them, and their lives were an ongoing dialogue with the divine. From the earliest days of birth to the final rites of death, religion was embedded in every family's existence. The gods were not abstract concepts, but active participants in shaping the course of life. Every stage of human life, whether a child's first steps, a youth's coming of age, a woman's role as a mother, or a family's farewell to a loved one, was intertwined with divine ritual and reverence. The Greeks recognized that their very existence depended on the gods, and their families were the living temples in which that sacred relationship was nurtured and honored. In such a world, to be human was to acknowledge the gods at every moment, and to maintain balance with the divine was the very essence of life itself. In the previous part, in ancient Greek society, every moment of life was profoundly intertwined with the gods, but this connection didn't end with death. For the Greeks, death was not an end, it was merely a continuation of the journey, one that needed to be properly managed through ritual and respect. The belief that the gods remained present in the world of the living extended to the realm of the dead. Just as life required constant devotion to the gods, death required an ongoing relationship with the deceased, who were believed to retain some presence in the world. For the ancient Greeks, the dead were never truly gone. Their spirits, the psyche, remained present, requiring proper care and attention to ensure peace and favor in the afterlife. This belief led to rituals that extended beyond the grave, as families were expected to continue to offer sacrifices, prayers, and care to their deceased loved ones. These rituals were not just for the benefit of the living, but also for the departed souls, ensuring that they found peace in the underworld. The funeral rites of ancient Greece were essential in helping the soul of the deceased transition into the afterlife. After the body had been washed and dressed, a funeral procession would take place. The family would carry the body to the grave, accompanied by mourners who would wail and sing laments. Sacrifices would be made, and the deceased would be buried with offerings, items to accompany them in the afterlife, such as coins for passage, food for sustenance, and artifacts for comfort. These ceremonies were not only about honoring the dead, but also about maintaining the balance between the living and the dead. Unlike modern understandings of death, which often separate the living and the deceased, the ancient Greeks believed that the dead were always with them. They did not leave this world entirely. The family's role was to nurture the relationship with the deceased, maintaining their presence in the lives of the living through regular offerings and memorial rituals. This wasn't just a family matter, it was a social expectation. Missing these rituals could be seen as a failure to properly honor the deceased and a potential disruption to the order of the universe. The Greeks practiced daily devotions to the deceased, offering libations of wine, olive oil, or milk at household altars and at tombs. They would also visit the graves of loved ones during important festivals like the Genea, a festival of the dead, or the Nicaea, a festival to honor the souls of the deceased, which provided an annual moment to commemorate and connect with the spirits of their ancestors. The ancient Greek view of death was deeply tied to their understanding of fate and divine will. To the Greeks, death wasn't a complete end. It was merely a passage from one form of existence to another. Those who died in battle, or who lived lives of honor, might be rewarded by the gods with a place among the heroes in Elysium, the blissful afterlife reserved for the virtuous. The spirits of the dead were believed to either rest in peace or wander in the underworld, and their fate was often shaped by the actions of the living. Even in the underworld, the relationship between mortals and the divine did not end. The deceased continued to need the gods' favor and the attention of the living. Hades and Persephone, rulers of the underworld, presided over the souls of the dead, while Hermes, the messenger god, guided the souls to the afterlife. In return for the offerings, the gods would ensure that the deceased had a peaceful afterlife and would protect the living from misfortune or bad luck associated with an improperly performed ritual. The concept of justice in the afterlife was also essential to Greek death beliefs. Spirits could face judgment based on their actions in life, and those who were wrongly treated or dishonored in the living world were expected to be avenged by the gods in the underworld. The idea of divine retribution carried over into the afterlife, ensuring that justice would be served both in this life and beyond the grave. The ancient Greeks saw death not as a separation from life, but as part of a continuing relationship with both the gods and the deceased. The gods themselves were always involved in the afterlife process, and the spirits of the dead remained part of the living world, demanding respect, offerings, and care. By maintaining these rituals, the living preserved the balance between the worlds of the mortals and the immortals, ensuring that the forces of fate, justice, and divine will were properly respected. Just as life required constant awareness of the divine and proper ritual, so too did death. The deceased were not lost. They were transitioning to a different form of existence, where their relationship with the living continued. For the Greeks, the cycle of life, death, and the afterlife was inseparable from the divine, and played a central role in shaping their daily existence and spiritual consciousness. In honoring the dead, they not only fulfilled their moral duties, but ensured the ongoing favor of the gods, a necessary connection that maintained the cosmic order and ensured prosperity and protection for the living. As we continue to explore the profound relationship between the gods and the natural world, we can see that for the ancient Greeks, nature itself was a reflection of divine will. Unlike modern interpretations, where natural phenomena are seen as independent, scientific events, the ancient Greeks viewed everything in nature as a direct manifestation of the gods, a divine sign or warning. There was no concept of a natural disaster in the way we think of it today. Instead, storms, earthquakes, and fires were interpreted as expressions of the gods' emotions and intentions. For the ancient Greeks, thunder and lightning were not simply natural occurrences but were divine manifestations, specifically the actions of Zeus, the king of the gods. In Greek mythology, Zeus was the god of the sky, the ruler of Olympus, and the enforcer of cosmic law and order. His power was so immense that even the forces of nature were at his command. Thunder and lightning were his tools for maintaining balance in the world, a way of asserting his supreme authority over both gods and mortals. When thunder rumbled in the sky, it was understood to be Zeus's voice echoing through the heavens. Lightning, the dramatic flashes that split the sky, was seen as Zeus's weapon, used to punish the impious and the defiant. It was also his means of intervening in human affairs, a way of showing his displeasure or enforcing divine justice. The Greeks believed that a bolt of lightning could strike down anyone who had overstepped their bounds, particularly those who were guilty of hubris, excessive pride, or arrogance, especially towards the gods. Hubris, in their view, was one of the greatest offenses against the divine order, and Zeus's lightning was the ultimate retribution. Zeus's lightning strikes were also understood as omen signs that foretold important events or divine intentions. If lightning struck a person's home or a prominent location, it was taken as a warning, a divine message that something significant was about to happen. Often, public figures, such as kings or military leaders, would consult seers or oracles to interpret these signs, as Zeus's lightning was seen as a direct reflection of his judgment. For instance, if a lightning storm hit a city during a time of war, it could be seen as a sign from Zeus about the city's fate in battle, either promising victory or foreshadowing defeat. But Zeus's thunder and lightning were not solely destructive forces. In some cases, they were also symbols of his power and majesty. Calm weather and peaceful skies were thought to be a sign that Zeus was at peace with humanity, while storms and lightning were his way of reminding humans of their vulnerability. It was an indication that they were always under his watchful eye, and no one could escape the wrath or favor of the gods. Zeus, as the embodiment of justice, used these natural events to correct wrongs, restore balance, and maintain order across the universe. The sea, vast and mysterious, was the domain of Poseidon, the god of the sea. In Greek mythology, Poseidon was one of the Olympian gods, the brother of Zeus and Hades. While Zeus ruled the heavens and Hades the underworld, Poseidon controlled the oceans, rivers, and all water bodies. The sea, in the eyes of the ancient Greeks, was a realm both beautiful and dangerous, teeming with life but also capable of unpredictable fury. For the Greeks, the sea was not just a body of water, it was Poseidon's kingdom, and everything within it, from the calm waters to the fierce waves, was his domain. Poseidon's favor could make the seas calm and bountiful, providing safe voyages and plenty of fish for the fishermen. A smooth, peaceful sea meant that Poseidon was pleased, and sailors would often offer sacrifices or prayers to the god before embarking on their voyages, hoping to gain his protection and favor. For these sailors, the sea was not just a physical force but a living entity, constantly shaped by Poseidon's moods. However, Poseidon's wrath was just as powerful as his favor. When Poseidon became angry, the sea would reflect his fury in the form of violent storms, earthquakes, and tsunamis. These natural disasters were seen as direct punishments from the god for offenses, whether it was disrespecting the sea, failing to offer proper sacrifices, or violating sacred oaths. The Greeks believed that Poseidon could unleash the full force of the ocean, creating storms that could destroy ships or cause earthquakes that would destroy cities. Poseidon's ability to manipulate the sea was a constant reminder of the vulnerability of humanity and the importance of respecting the gods. In many myths, Poseidon is depicted as a mighty god of the sea who could summon giant waves or create storms at will. One famous example is the story of Odysseus, the hero of Homer's Odyssey, who faces Poseidon's wrath after blinding his son, the Cyclops Polyphemus. Poseidon, in turn, causes Odysseus to suffer for years of hardship on his journey home, sending violent storms to thwart his progress and test his resolve. This myth is a clear example of how the Greeks believed the sea, as Poseidon's realm, could either bless or curse individuals based on their actions towards the gods. Just as with Zeus's thunder and lightning, Poseidon's control over the sea extended beyond simple natural phenomena. The ancient Greeks saw the sea as a reflection of God's will. It was not just a place where ships sailed. It was a domain where divine intervention occurred, shaping the lives of those who dared to venture into it. A calm sea meant that Poseidon was in a good mood, while a violent storm was his way of showing his displeasure. This connection between the gods and nature reinforced the belief that everything in the world, from the weather to the seas, was governed by the gods' desires, making nature not only a source of sustenance and beauty, but also a divine force that had to be respected at all costs. What makes the Greek worldview so distinctive is the absence of a clear distinction between the natural world and the divine. For the Greeks, there were no purely natural phenomena. Every storm, earthquake, flood, or calm day was a sign, either a blessing or a warning from the gods. The Greeks didn't view nature as indifferent or random. It was imbued with divine meaning. The gods didn't just live in temples or on Mount Olympus. They were present in every natural occurrence, every gust of wind, every flash of lightning, every tremor of the earth. This perspective shaped every aspect of Greek life. When things went wrong, whether it was a crop failure, a military defeat, or a natural disaster, Greeks would often ask, "What have we done to anger the gods?" They would perform rituals and make offerings to try and restore balance. The gods' presence in nature wasn't just a spiritual belief, it was a practical guide for living. Every act of nature, whether calm or destructive, carried with it an opportunity to understand the will of the gods. As we've seen throughout this exploration of the ancient Greek worldview, the relationship between the gods and the natural world was deep, complex, and omnipresent. Nature wasn't just a backdrop to the human experience, it was the stage on which the gods enacted their will. Every storm was a message, every earthquake a warning, and every calm day a moment of divine favor. The absence of a secular realm meant that the Greeks could never escape the influence of the divine. Nature was their reminder that the gods were always watching, and the forces of nature were always directly linked to their own lives. The divine and natural worlds were inseparable, and everything that happened around them was a potential divine sign, guiding their decisions, actions, and understanding of the world. This is a worldview in which every aspect of life, whether mundane or extraordinary, was saturated with divine significance, and in which the gods ruled not just over human affairs, but over the very fabric of the universe itself. The ancient Greek world was deeply intertwined with religion, and this worldview shaped every aspect of life, from daily routines to grand state decisions. There were no boundaries between the sacred and the secular, between the divine and the human. Everything, from personal actions to civic events, was considered a part of a larger divine order. Life itself was a continuous act of reverence towards the gods, where every decision, every action, and every event was seen through the lens of the divine. In this context, there was no such thing as wrong belief or heresy in the way we understand it today. For the Greeks, it wasn't about holding the right beliefs about the gods or the cosmos. What mattered most was the correct behavior. The concept of orthopraxy, or correct practice, took precedence over orthodoxy, or correct belief. It wasn't about subscribing to a set of theological ideas, but about performing the rituals properly, following the prescribed ceremonies, and maintaining the proper reverence toward the divine forces. The Greeks understood that their prosperity and safety depended on maintaining correct behavior. Rituals, sacrifices, and devotion were seen as a direct reflection of how the gods would treat them in return. In the Greek mind, the gods were not just abstract figures. They were human, like embodiments of natural forces and human ideals. The gods represented everything from the powerful elements of nature, like the sea, the sky, and the earth, to the highest virtues that humans could aspire to. Zeus, as the ruler of the sky, represented not just divine authority but the order of the universe, while Athena symbolized wisdom and justice, and Apollo embodied beauty and truth. Even gods associated with more specific human ideals, such as Artemis, goddess of the hunt, or Aphrodite, goddess of love, were not just supernatural beings. They were idealized versions of human qualities that people could strive to embody. Thus, the gods were not simply to be worshipped for their divine powers, but also revered as models for human behavior. The ancient Greeks didn't separate the divine from the human. In fact, they saw these two aspects as inseparable. The gods were reflections of nature and human aspirations, creating a worldview in which everything was imbued with divine significance. The natural world was alive with divine presence, and human striving was understood as a way of aligning with the gods, striving to be virtuous, just, and wise, as they were. Ultimately, Greek philosophy and religion painted a world saturated with meaning. The gods were not just subjects of belief, they were a framework through which the Greeks understood their world. Every aspect of their lives, from the earthly to the divine, was framed by a set of religious practices that sought to align the human experience with the divine. It was a holistic and comprehensive worldview, one that saw human life, the natural world, and the divine realm as intricately connected, each influencing and shaping the other in a harmonious cycle. In the end, the key takeaway from ancient Greek philosophy is the idea that divine forces shape everything, whether it's the weather, the sea, human virtues, or the natural order, and that humans must recognize and honor the gods through their actions and behaviors. Whether in rituals, moral striving, or civic life, the gods were always present, guiding humanity to find balance and meaning in a world that was seen as divinely ordered. The Greeks believed that only by understanding and respecting these divine forces could humans achieve prosperity, peace, and ultimate fulfillment. As we've just seen, life in ancient Greece was a holistic religious reality, where every action, big or small, held a sacred significance. However, for modern people, it would be incredibly difficult to survive in such a world, where every day was filled with rituals of worship, the fear of the gods, and belief in the power of supernatural forces. Our modern world has become so complicated and detached from such sacred awareness. We've lost touch with a key element of humility and respect for nature and the laws that exist beyond ourselves. But the lesson we can draw from ancient Greece is to learn how to live with moderation, maintain a humble mindset, and respect the natural laws and universal principles. These qualities can help us live harmoniously with the world around us and find peace and sustainability in our lives. Although the gods are no longer worshipped in the same way, they continue to live on in art, in our psychology, and in human culture. These divine symbols like Zeus, Athena, and Apollo remain strongly present in works of art, stories, and even in the ethical principles we follow. The archetypes of the gods still guide humanity, whether we acknowledge it or not. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through ancient Greece. If you found this video interesting and insightful, please don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with your friends so they can join us on more exciting historical adventures. Wishing you all a peaceful night, and I look forward to seeing you in our next adventure.